Fire doesn't beg the forest to stay unburned. It clears the way for new life. Have you ever felt like you were shrinking in someone else's shadow? You give, you explain, you bend so far just to keep the peace that you don't even recognize yourself anymore. You tell yourself, if I just love them more, maybe they'll change. But here's the brutal truth. Some people don't want to be healed. They want to feed on your energy, your attention, your kindness. And they'll take it all until there's nothing left. Cutting off a toxic person isn't just a decision, it's a resurrection. It's like finally ripping off a mask that smiled while stabbing you quietly in the back. Toxic people rarely scream when they're exposed. They manipulate in whispers. They don't need to yell to control you. They plant doubt, twist your words, make you question yourself until you think you're the problem. And the second you walk away, you'll see it clearly. They never loved you. They loved the access to your light, your stability, your silence. Imagine your life is a house, peaceful, quiet. And one day, a guest arrives. They don't knock, they bring chaos with them. Slowly, the walls shake, windows crack, and you're left living in ruins. Now ask yourself, why are you letting someone destroy the very home you worked so hard to build? Here's the secret no one tells you. The moment you cut them off, the fog lifts. It won't be easy at first. You might feel guilty, confused. You might even doubt your decision. But keep walking, because on the other side of that pain is power. You don't need to explain your boundaries. You don't need to defend your peace. You just need to enforce it. And when you do, everything shifts. The noise fades. Your energy comes back. You breathe deeper, smile wider, sleep better. And for the first time in a long time, you feel like yourself again. So what really happens when you stop begging to be understood and start honoring your worth? Stay with me, because once you cut them off, the healing begins and the power returns. Type, I choose peace over poison in the comments if you're ready to take your power back. Let's begin. Number 1. Cut the snake and the garden grows again. Have you ever noticed how loud your mind gets when you're walking on eggshells? That buzzing in your head. It's not your thoughts. It's survival mode. It's the mental gymnastics you perform to avoid the next outburst, the next guilt trip, the next cold silence. And the strange part? You get so used to the noise, you forget what peace sounds like. But here's the twist. When you cut that toxic person off, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's powerful. It's not just quiet in your home or on your phone. It's quiet in your soul. And in that stillness, something ancient awakens, your own voice. Toxic people don't just disturb the peace around you, they colonize your mind. You start doubting your choices, filtering your words, rearranging your truth just to avoid conflict. You forget what it feels like to just be, to speak freely without watching their face for signs of disapproval, to exist without feeling like you're under a microscope. Your thoughts become hostage to their reactions. And every time you silence yourself for them, you bury a piece of your identity. But once you remove them from your life, something miraculous happens. It's like pulling weeds from a garden that's been strangled. At first, the space looks bare, unfamiliar, even lonely. But then, the sun hits different. The soil breathes. And soon, your voice starts to grow again. Not the version shaped by fear, but the real one. The voice that says, I don't need to explain myself anymore. The voice that says, I was never the problem. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Peace comes when you no longer trade your soul for someone else's storm." And Seneca reminded us, "The soul becomes stronger in solitude." That silence you feared. It's not punishment, it's recovery. It's the detox your mind needed. It's where your confidence returns, not because someone finally sees your worth, but because you do. Let me ask you something. What would your life feel like if no one was constantly making you question your own reality? What would you do if you finally trusted your own thoughts again? Wouldn't that be freedom? So here's your turning point. Protect your mind like it's sacred ground. Guard your peace like it's gold. Because cutting them off isn't just about ending chaos. It's about rediscovering the clearest voice you've ever known. Your own. Type, "My peace is my power," in the comments if you're ready to hear yourself again. Number 2. You can't pour from an empty cup, so stop letting them tip it over. Do you know what real freedom feels like? It's not just walking away, it's feeling the weight lift off your chest, realizing you were tired not from life, but from them. When you cut off a toxic person, the first thing you get back is something so underrated yet so powerful, your emotional energy. And trust me, you don't even realize how drained you were until you finally feel what it's like to breathe without tension. Being around someone toxic is like standing next to a leaking faucet, drip, drip, drip. Complaints, guilt trips, mood swings, passive aggression. You keep thinking it's no big deal, that you're strong enough to handle it, that being there for them makes you a good person. But here's the truth. You're not supporting them. You're sacrificing yourself. And every time you listen to another emotional dump, every time you absorb their chaos, every time you fix what they keep breaking, you lose a piece of your own fire. But once they're out of your life, the shift is immediate. You wake up without dread. You go to bed without replaying arguments in your head. You're not walking on emotional glass anymore. And suddenly, you have space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to enjoy the peace you forgot was possible. Epictetus said, "He who guards his peace guards his power." Think about that. Your emotional energy is your power source. It fuels your discipline, your focus, your ability to show up in your life with presence and strength. But toxic people are like emotional parasites. They feed off your energy, then leave you empty, and somehow still asking if you did something wrong. Let me tell you about Brian. Quiet guy. Kind-hearted, stuck in a friendship that felt more like emotional babysitting. His friend was always drowning in drama, always blaming the world, always needing saving. Brian thought he was helping, but every conversation left him feeling heavier. He didn't even realize how deep it ran until one day, without fanfare, he stopped replying. No speech, no fight, just silence. And in that silence, something changed. His mind got clearer. He was more present with his family. He had energy to pour into his goals again. That's when he understood. He'd been giving gold to someone who only knew how to waste it. So ask yourself, after you talk to them, do you feel calm or do you feel crushed? Do you leave feeling uplifted or like you just survived a storm? Because here's the reality, your energy is limited. And every drop you spend on someone who doesn't respect it is a drop stolen from the life you could be building. Protect your peace like your future depends on it, because it does. And once you stop giving your energy to what drains you, you start giving it to what grows you. That's when everything changes. Type, My energy is sacred in the comments if you're done pouring into people who only take. Let the healing begin. If this hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button to protect your peace. Subscribe if you're ready to cut the chaos and reclaim your power. And share this with someone who needs to hear the truth. Number 3. When the smoke clears, you see the fire was always burning. It's funny how we only realize the damage once the storm passes. When you're deep in it, deep in the drama, the guilt trips, the subtle jabs dressed as jokes, you don't notice how much you're bleeding emotionally. You keep stitching yourself back together, telling yourself it's not that bad, that maybe they're just going through something, that maybe you're too sensitive. But the day you walk away from that toxic person, the fog begins to lift. And suddenly you see the wreckage you've been calling home. That's the moment it hits you. You tolerated far more than you ever should have. And for what? To keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to not be the bad guy. But here's the hard truth. Fake peace is just slow poison. It doesn't heal you. It breaks you in silence. Toxic people don't always scream or explode. Sometimes they erode you gently. A backhanded compliment here, a silent treatment there, a sarcastic dig when you're vulnerable. And because they're not shouting, you convince yourself they're not hurting you. You adapt. You silence your needs. You shrink your light so they don't feel insecure in your glow. And one day, you don't even recognize who you are without their influence. That's how slow destruction works. It doesn't announce itself. It whispers you to sleep. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What you allow is what will continue." And he was right. Every time you bite your tongue to avoid upsetting them, every time you downplay how much it hurt just to keep the friendship going, you're feeding the fire of false peace, and that fire doesn't warm you. It burns you quietly from the inside out. Let me tell you about Claire, soft-spoken, loyal to a fault. She had a friend who always made her feel less, not outright cruelty, just constant shade. If Claire achieved something, it was always followed by a joke. If she spent time with others, she was guilted. She kept swallowing it, calling it quirks and just how she is. Until one day, the friendship faded. No fight, just space. And in that space, Claire felt it. A weight lifted. Her smile came back. And that's when it hit her. She'd been tolerating emotional manipulation for years, all in the name of not rocking the boat. But if the boat is leaking, rocking it is the only way to survive. So ask yourself, what have you been calling normal just to stay comfortable? What patterns have you accepted just because they were familiar? Here's how you rise. First, trust the clarity distance gives you. If someone's absence brings you peace, that's not a coincidence, it's confirmation. Second, raise your standards. You're not here to be someone's emotional cushion. And third, never again trade your mental well-being for temporary comfort. Cutting off a toxic person isn't the end of something. It's the beginning of self-respect. And once you realize how much you've tolerated, you'll never let anyone make you small again. Type, "I see the truth now," in the comments if you're done confusing endurance with love. The fog has cleared. Now it's time to rebuild. Number 4. You don't know you were drowning until you finally breathe. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after you walk away from someone toxic. At first, it feels unfamiliar, even lonely. But then, the fog begins to lift. And with each passing day, something deeper hits you. A sharp, almost painful realization. I can't believe I tolerated all that. That's what makes this stage of healing so intense, because now, with distance and perspective, you begin to see it all clearly. The guilt tripping, the fake concern, the manipulation dressed up as love. And you ask yourself, why didn't I see it sooner? But here's the truth. When you're too close to the fire, all you can see is smoke. You were so focused on keeping the peace that you didn't realize you were at war with yourself. Toxic people don't always destroy you loudly. Some do it subtly, through backhanded compliments, sarcastic digs, shifting blame, or emotional silence. And because it's not obvious, you make excuses for them. You call it just how they are. You convince yourself they didn't mean it. You say things like, maybe I'm just overthinking. But you weren't. Your instincts were screaming while your loyalty kept you quiet. Marcus Aurelius once said, "What you allow is what will continue." And that's what happens in toxic dynamics. You allow a little, then a little more, and soon your boundaries aren't just bent, they're erased. You shrink yourself to avoid their outbursts. You hide your needs to keep things calm. And worst of all, you forget what real respect looks like. That's the cost of false peace, your inner stability in exchange for surface-level calm. Imagine your soul is a room filled with light. Every time you accept mistreatment in the name of keeping the peace, it's like pulling the curtains shut one by one. Until one day, you're sitting in the dark, and you've forgotten that sunlight even exists. That's what this realization feels like when it hits, like ripping those curtains open and seeing all the dust you've been breathing. Claire knows this all too well, a sweet woman, patient to a fault. For years, she had a friend who constantly made her feel less, guilt-tripping her for spending time with others, undermining her wins, always playing the victim when called out. Claire stayed silent, thinking it was just part of the friendship. But when life naturally created distance between them, something shifted. Her smile returned, her energy lifted. And that's when it sank in. She'd been tolerating emotional abuse disguised as loyalty. So ask yourself this: what are you calling normal that would shock you if you saw it happening to someone you love? What are you brushing off just to maintain a peace that isn't even real? Here's the truth. You didn't overreact. You under-respected yourself. And now you know better. Type, "I will never shrink for peace again" in the comments if you're done confusing survival with love. The truth doesn't hurt. It sets you free. Number 5. You'll miss the noise before you realize it was poison. Here's the part no one warns you about. What happens after you walk away, after the boundary is set, after the messages stop, after the chaos goes quiet. At first, that silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels hollow, like you stepped out of a crowded room and into an empty house. And in that stillness, a voice creeps in. Did I make a mistake? But let's get real. You're not missing the person. You're missing the routine. You're not aching for love. You're just detoxing from noise. When you've lived in emotional chaos long enough, peace feels unnatural. You get used to walking on eggshells, used to decoding mixed signals, used to fixing someone else's mess just to keep the peace. So when it finally ends, and the emotional roller coaster comes to a stop, it's jarring. That feeling isn't loneliness, it's withdrawal. Because no one talks about how addiction to dysfunction feels like connection, even when it's draining you. But here's what Stoic wisdom teaches us. Seneca said, Solitude is not the absence of love, but the presence of self-respect. You didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you started healing, because you finally chose yourself. Think of it like leaving a storm. For so long you learned how to survive in the wind and rain. You became good at it, but now you're standing in the calm, and it feels strange, too quiet, too still. You start asking, should I go back? But ask yourself this: do you really miss the person, or just the familiarity of the storm? Rachel did. She stayed in a friendship for years, one laced with subtle digs, emotional coldness, and constant negativity. She hung on because of history, because of habit. But when she finally let go, the silence was sharp. The texts stopped. The calls ended. Her days felt empty. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. Her thoughts got clearer, her emotions leveled out. She didn't feel like she was being emotionally ambushed anymore. And then it hit her. What felt like loss was actually the return of peace. So, if you're in that space now, here's your reminder. Silence isn't the enemy. It's the soil where peace takes root. Missing the chaos is normal. But don't confuse that with needing it. You're not alone, you're free. Type, "I choose peace over noise" in the comments if you're learning to love the quiet. Because real peace doesn't beg to be loud. It just stays. Number 6. When you clean the room, better guests walk in. Let's talk about a truth most people don't realize until they live it. When you remove toxic people from your life, you don't just lose chaos, you create space. And that space? It doesn't stay empty for long. Once it's no longer filled with guilt, drama, or emotional exhaustion, something powerful starts to happen. You begin to attract better, not louder, not flashier, just healthier. People who meet you with respect, with peace, with the same energy you've been silently pouring into others for years. At first, yes, the silence is strange. The absence feels cold. You might wonder, did I do the right thing? You might fear you'll be alone forever. But sit with that stillness long enough, and you'll start to notice it. The anxiety starts to fade. Your chest loosens. Your standards rise. And slowly, the vibration of your life shifts. Because when you choose self-respect, your entire environment begins to reflect that decision. Here's the raw truth. The people we allow into our space reflect the story we're telling ourselves about what we deserve. If you accept manipulation, it's often because you've been conditioned to believe that's normal. If you tolerate chaos, maybe you've been taught that love should be earned through struggle. But when you raise your standards, not with your words, but with your actions, the world adjusts. You stop chasing, you start attracting. Marcus Aurelius said, "Like attracts like." Elevate yourself, and your circle follows. You become a magnet, not through force, but through frequency. You stop over-explaining your boundaries because the right people won't push them. You stop apologizing for expecting mutual effort because the right people give it freely. You stop shrinking your light because the right people don't feel threatened by your growth. They reflect it. Josh learned this the hard way. Years of keeping people in his life out of habit, out of loyalty, out of fear. Friends who mocked his ambition. Relationships that drained him dry. He told himself it was better than being alone. But then he reached his breaking point. No drama. No final showdown, just distance. And with that distance, something shifted. He started respecting his own time. He stopped chasing. And without trying, better people showed up. Co-workers who supported him, friends who reciprocated, a relationship that felt safe, not suffocating. So maybe you're wondering now, how do I attract the right people? Simple. You stop settling for the wrong ones. You stop entertaining anyone who disturbs your peace. You live your values out loud, not just in what you say, but in what you allow. And you trust the process. Because when you stop watering dead plants, your garden finally has space to bloom. Cutting off a toxic person isn't just about who you leave behind, it's about who you make room for. And once you choose you, the right ones will find you, not because you chased them, but because you aligned with them. Type, "I'm ready to welcome better" in the comments if you're done letting chaos live rent-free in your life. Better guests are already knocking. Clear the space so they can walk in. Number 7. When you close the wrong door, the right ones start knocking. There comes a moment, after all the noise, the mind games, the emotional fatigue, where you finally say, enough. You cut the cord, you stop explaining yourself, you walk away. And at first, the silence feels cold. The space they once filled feels too quiet. You start wondering if you made a mistake. But here's what most people don't realize, that silence isn't emptiness. It's a reset. It's the beginning of something better. Because once that toxic energy is gone, you don't just feel lighter. You become magnetic to something far healthier. Think of your life like a garden. For years you were watering weeds, trying to convince them to grow like roses, exhausting yourself in soil that gave you nothing but thorns. But once you pull those weeds out, once you reclaim that space, you begin to notice the sunlight again. And the flowers? They start blooming on their own. Attracting better people isn't luck, it's alignment. When you raise your standards and actually enforce them, your world shifts. You stop answering messages that feel like traps. You stop showing up for people who never show up for you. You stop needing to prove you're good enough. And suddenly, you start drawing in people who respect you, because you respect you. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." In other words, stop debating who deserves your time. Be the person who protects their peace, and the right people will naturally align with your energy. You won't need to beg, you won't need to explain. Healthy people recognize healthy boundaries, and instead of draining you, they'll bring rest to your soul. Let me tell you about Josh. For years, he kept the wrong people close. Friends who gossiped, partners who manipulated, co-workers who only called when they needed something. He told himself, it's just how life is. Until one day, he stopped replying. He stopped being available for dysfunction. And something wild happened. The silence didn't stay empty. New people started entering his life. Peaceful ones, kind ones, people who didn't need drama to feel close. And that's when he realized he had been making space for them all along. So if you're in that in-between place right now, wondering when the right people will come, here's your answer. They're already on the way. But the space they need is still occupied. Type, "I'm clearing space for real ones" in the comments if you're done with forced connections. You don't chase what's meant for you, you align and it arrives. Number 8. When you stop dancing with chaos, peace learns your name. Cutting off a toxic person feels like silence at first. But that silence, it's not emptiness, it's the sound of your life recalibrating. You don't notice the shift right away. At first, it feels like something is missing. You check your phone, and there's no drama, no passive-aggressive texts, no manipulation disguised as care. just quiet. But give it time, because once that storm clears, the sun comes through. And in that warmth, you start to notice something incredible. Better people start finding their way to you, not because you begged for them, not because you chased, but because when you stopped entertaining chaos, you became a signal for something greater: respect, peace, and mutual energy. Here's the reality. You can't attract healthy people while holding space for those who drain you. When you keep toxic people around, even out of guilt or habit, you send a message to the universe and to yourself. This is what I accept. But when you finally walk away, when you stop picking up calls that trigger your anxiety, when you stop saying yes to people who wouldn't lift a finger for you, your entire reality begins to shift. As Marcus Aurelius said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And your relationships are no different. If your thoughts are chaotic, fearful, insecure, you'll attract people who feed that. But when your mind is calm, clear, and confident, that same calm begins showing up in human form. A friend of mine, we'll call her Alina, was stuck in a loop with someone who constantly tested her worth. A friend who mocked her dreams, laughed at her boundaries, and only showed up when it was convenient. Alina hung on, thinking maybe loyalty meant staying. But one day, she walked away. No drama, no shouting, just silence. At first it hurt, but then something shifted. She began to glow differently, and soon she noticed people around her treating her differently, with kindness, with sincerity, with care. Not because the world changed, but because she did. So ask yourself this: are you still dancing with dysfunction out of fear of the quiet? Or are you ready to stand still long enough for peace to recognize you? Because when you stop entertaining chaos, you don't become alone. You become available to those who don't drain you, but nourish you. Type, "I'm done dancing with chaos" in the comments if you're ready to welcome people who reflect your peace, not disturb it. Your new circle starts with your next number. And if this message sparked something in you, hit that like button to honor your growth. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to level up, and share this video with someone who's ready to stop surviving and start thriving. Let's build this tribe, one truth at a time,